You're just a cook, Madison. Real business requires a brain, not a spatula. My father's words echoed across the conference room while my brothers laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching them celebrate what they thought was their inheritance of our family's restaurant empire. What they didn't know was that for the past 7 years, I'd been building something they couldn't even comprehend. My name is Madison Clark, I'm 33 years old, and I'm about to watch my family's world collapse in the most satisfying way possible. The lawyer's office in downtown Chicago felt suffocating that morning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Michigan Avenue, but nobody was admiring the view. My father, Richard Clark, sat at the head of the mahogany conference table like a king about to distribute his kingdom. My brothers, Tyler and Carson, flanked him like eager princes. Tyler was 38, with his Harvard MBA and zero actual restaurant experience. Carson was 35, spending more time at country clubs than understanding food costs. And then there was me, the daughter who'd spent 15 years working her way from prep cook to executive chef, who'd earned 2 Michelin stars before turning 30, who'd revolutionized our family's menu concepts and saved us from bankruptcy twice. But I was just a cook. Let's begin, said Mr. Harrison, our family attorney for 20 years. He adjusted his glasses and opened the thick folder containing my father's estate distribution documents. Richard has decided to restructure the family business before his retirement. I noticed he didn't say, "Will reading." This was happening while Dad was still alive. That was interesting. Tyler and Carson, Dad announced, his voice full of pride, you'll be inheriting Clark Restaurant Group. All 23 locations, the franchise operations, and the commercial real estate holdings. Combined value of approximately $42 million. My brothers actually high-fived each other. Tyler was already pulling out his phone, probably texting his wife about the yacht he'd been eyeing. Carson grinned at me with barely concealed smugness. Madison, Dad continued, and I could hear the dismissiveness in his tone, you'll receive the original restaurant equipment from our first location. The ovens, the mixers, the prep tables. Some of it's antique now. You always loved that old kitchen, so it seems fitting. The room fell silent except for Carson's poorly suppressed snicker. They were giving me used restaurant equipment while my brothers got a multi-million-dollar empire. Aunt Linda, who'd insisted on attending, actually gasped. Richard, she said sharply, you can't be serious. Madison built half those restaurant concepts. The summer menu program alone increased revenue by 30%. Madison is a talented chef, Dad said, emphasizing the word like it was something small and manageable. But running a restaurant empire requires business acumen. She's never shown interest in the corporate side. I finally spoke, my voice calm and measured. Dad, just to clarify, I'm receiving all the equipment from the original Clark's Steakhouse location? Everything in that kitchen? He looked surprised I was speaking at all. Yes, all of it. The sentimental pieces. You always said that kitchen had soul. He said it mockingly, like caring about where food was prepared was naive. And Tyler and Carson get the restaurant group, the franchise operations, and the real estate? Correct. He smiled indulgently, like he was being generous by giving me anything at all. I sat back in my chair and did something I hadn't done in 15 years of family meetings. I smiled. Really smiled. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. There are, however, some complications we need to discuss regarding the franchise operations. Complications? Tyler's smile faltered. Yes, the lawyer continued, glancing at me with something that looked almost like respect. It appears there are some intellectual property issues that need to be addressed before the transfer can be completed. What kind of issues? Carson demanded. I leaned forward, still smiling. The kind where every single recipe, cooking technique, plating method, and menu concept used in Clark Restaurant Group has been patented under my name for the past 7 years. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. Growing up in the Clark family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy from day one. Dad had opened Clark's Steakhouse in 1987 in a small space in Lincoln Park. By the time I was born in 1992, he'd already expanded to 3 locations. The restaurant business was his pride, his legacy, his entire identity. Tyler and Carson were groomed for greatness from childhood. They attended business camps, learned about P&L statements before they learned algebra, and were promised the empire from the moment they understood what inheritance meant. Meanwhile, I was expected to maybe marry well, perhaps manage a single location if I was lucky, but certainly never lead. I fell in love with cooking by accident. At 12 years old, I wandered into the kitchen of our Lincoln Park location during a busy Saturday dinner service. Chef Antoine, a gruff French man who terrified most of the staff, was orchestrating controlled chaos. The heat, the precision, the artistry of it all captivated me instantly. "You want to learn?" he'd asked gruffly, seeing me watching. "Then stop staring and start washing vegetables." I spent every weekend in that kitchen for the next 6 years. While Tyler was at Northwestern studying business and Carson was partying at University of Illinois, I was learning the difference between a Brunoise and a Julienne, understanding why mise en place mattered, and discovering that cooking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about chemistry, creativity, and soul. Dad thought it was a cute hobby. "Let her play in the kitchen," he'd tell people. "She'll grow out of it when she realizes how hard real work is." I didn't grow out of it. I went to the Culinary Institute of America, graduated top of my class, and then did something that shocked everyone. I worked at other restaurants. Per se in New York. Alinea here in Chicago. Le Bernardin. I learned from the best, absorbed their techniques, and developed my own style. When I returned to Clark's at 25, I wasn't asking for a management position. I wanted to cook. I started as a line cook at our River North location, working my way up through sheer skill and dedication. Within 18 months, I was sous chef. 6 months after that, executive chef. That's when I started changing things. The menu Dad had used for 20 years was stagnant. Reliable, sure, but boring. I introduced seasonal rotations, locally sourced ingredients, and modern techniques that elevated our food from good to extraordinary. Our reviews went from 3 stars to 4 stars. Revenue increased by 30% in the first year alone. Madison's little menu tweaks are doing well, Dad told investors, taking full credit while barely acknowledging my name. When I brought my concerns about food costs and supplier relationships to family meetings, Tyler would literally talk over me. When I suggested expanding our wine program and training staff on pairings, Carson laughed and said that's what sommeliers were for, not kitchen help. But the final straw came 5 years ago during a disastrous expansion attempt. Dad wanted to franchise Clark's, turning our family restaurants into a national chain. Tyler and Carson supported it immediately, seeing dollar signs. I argued that our quality control would suffer, that our suppliers couldn't scale that quickly, that franchising required a completely different business model. "You worry about your recipes," Dad had said dismissively. "Let the businessmen handle business decisions." The franchise rollout was a disaster. Quality plummeted. Reviews tanked. We faced lawsuits from 3 different franchise owners within the first year. The Clark name, which had meant something in Chicago for decades, was becoming a joke. I fixed it. Working 18-hour days, I personally visited every franchise location, retrained their kitchen staff, renegotiated supplier contracts, and created standardized systems that ensured quality control. I developed detailed operational manuals, created training videos, and designed recipes that could be executed consistently across multiple locations. Within 2 years, the franchise operation wasn't just stable. It was thriving. We went from 8 struggling locations to 23 successful ones. Revenue exceeded projections by 40%. "My sons really turned this around," Dad told the Chicago Tribune in an interview, standing between Tyler and Carson for the photo. I wasn't even invited. That's when I started documenting everything. Every recipe I created, every technique I developed, every menu concept, plating design, and operational system. And I started filing patents. The patent attorney I hired, Sarah Chen, initially thought I was paranoid. "Restaurant recipes are rarely patented," she'd explained. "They're usually protected as trade secrets." "I don't want trade secrets," I told her. "I want legal ownership of every single culinary innovation I've created for this company." We got creative. I didn't just patent individual recipes. I patented the processes, the specific technique for dry aging our steaks that made them legendary. The precise method for our truffle butter that food critics raved about. The plating system that made our presentations Instagram famous. The training methodology that kept quality consistent across locations. For 7 years, while Dad and my brothers took credit for their success, I was quietly filing patent after patent. 143 patents in total, covering everything from specific recipes to cooking techniques to menu design concepts. The franchise agreements Dad had signed required all locations to use Clark family recipes and techniques. He thought he owned those. He was wrong. I owned them. Every single one. The color drained from Dad's face so quickly I thought he might need medical attention. Tyler had dropped his phone. Carson's mouth hung open like a caught fish. That's impossible, Dad whispered. Those recipes are family property. Clark Restaurant Group property. Mr. Harrison, looking decidedly uncomfortable, pulled out another thick folder. Actually, Richard, Miss Clark has been filing patents on her culinary innovations since 2018. Every recipe, every technique, every operational system currently in use across all Clark Restaurant Group locations is legally protected under her name. Show me, Tyler demanded, finally finding his voice. I pulled out my own folder, much thicker than Harrison's. Inside were copies of every patent certificate, every filing, every approval. The 45-day dry aging process that makes our ribeye famous? Patent number US 10,874,321. The truffle butter recipe that every food critic mentions? Patent US 10,923,847. The plating system for our signature dishes? Design patent 892,347 United States dollars. Should I continue? You can't patent recipes, Carson protested, but his voice lacked confidence. Actually, you can patent processes and specific methods, Sarah Chen said, entering the conference room right on cue. I'd asked her to attend, knowing this moment would come. Miss Clark has been exceptionally thorough. She hasn't just patented recipes. She's patented the specific techniques, timing, and methods that make Clark Restaurant Group's food distinctive. Without access to these patents, the franchise locations literally cannot prepare the food they've been serving. Dad stood up, his face turning red. This is betrayal. You've been plotting against your own family? No, I said calmly, I've been protecting my work. Work that you've taken credit for. Work that you've dismissed as just cooking, while building a $42 million empire on my creations. Aunt Linda, who'd been silent through the revelations, suddenly started laughing. Oh Richard, this is perfect. You arrogant fool. Linda, stay out of this, Dad snapped. I will not. She stood up, moving to stand behind my chair like a guardian. I've watched you dismiss this brilliant young woman for years. She saved your business twice. She created everything that made your franchise successful. And you thanked her by giving her used equipment while handing everything to your sons who can barely tell the difference between a sauté pan and a stock pot. What do you want? Tyler asked me, his business mind finally catching up. Money? A position? Name your price. I smiled again. I don't want a position in your company, Tyler. I want licensing fees. Sarah opened her briefcase and distributed documents to everyone. Miss Clark is prepared to license her patents to Clark Restaurant Group. The terms are quite reasonable. 23% of gross revenue from all locations using her recipes and techniques. 23%? Carson nearly shouted. That's insane. Is it? I asked mildly. Without my recipes and techniques, your franchise locations can't serve the food they've been advertising. You'll face lawsuits from franchise owners for breach of contract. You'll lose all your locations within 6 months. 23% seems quite generous when the alternative is losing everything. Dad sat back down heavily. I could see him calculating, realizing the trap he'd built for himself. By giving me the worthless kitchen equipment while keeping the valuable business, he'd walked right into my carefully constructed revenge. There is another option, Sarah said, her voice professional but with an edge of satisfaction. Miss Clark is also prepared to make an offer to purchase Clark Restaurant Group outright. This time, even Harrison looked shocked. I pulled out one more document. Phoenix Culinary Holdings. That's my company. I've been acquiring struggling restaurants for 5 years, turning them around using techniques I developed, and either selling them for profit or keeping them as part of my portfolio. I currently own 18 restaurants across 6 states, with gross revenue of $42 million annually. The numbers were deliberately chosen. My company was worth exactly what Dad had just valued his at. You own 18 restaurants? Dad's voice was barely audible. 19 now, I corrected. I closed on a bistro in Seattle this morning. Would have been 20, but I was waiting to see what happened here today. Tyler was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably searching for Phoenix Culinary Holdings. His face went pale as he found the articles. She's telling the truth. Food and Wine named her one of the top restaurant operators under 40. Forbes featured her in their 30 Under 30 Feet list 3 years ago. Under a different name, I explained. Phoenix was my mother's maiden name. Madison Phoenix. The culinary world knows me by that name. You never bothered to pay attention to what I was doing outside these walls. Mom had died when I was 15. Cancer. Dad had thrown himself into work afterward, barely acknowledging his grief or mine. I'd taken her maiden name for my business as a tribute to the one parent who'd believed I could be more than just a cook. This is why you wanted the equipment, Dad said slowly, understanding dawning. The original kitchen. Sentimental value, I confirmed. Mom and I spent hours in that kitchen when I was little. Before she got sick. Before you decided daughters weren't worth investing in. I wanted those pieces because they matter to me. But I also wanted to see if you'd actually go through with it. If you'd actually give your daughter garbage while enriching your sons. Aunt Linda squeezed my shoulder. She'd been Mom's sister, and she'd watched Dad's favoritism grow more blatant over the years. So what happens now? Carson asked, his earlier smugness completely evaporated. Now you have a choice, I said, standing up. Option 1. Pay licensing fees of 23% of gross revenue for as long as you use my recipes and techniques. That's approximately $9 million annually, based on current performance. Option 2. Sell me Clark Restaurant Group for $42 million, which I'm prepared to pay in cash. Cash? Tyler repeated. Phoenix Culinary Holdings is privately held and very well funded, Sarah explained. Miss Clark has investors who believe in her vision. The money is ready to transfer. Option 3, I continued, you refuse both offers, try to operate without my recipes, watch your franchise empire collapse within 6 months, face lawsuits from franchise owners, and lose everything anyway. But at least you'll still have your pride. The silence stretched on. I could see Dad calculating, his business mind warring with his ego. Tyler and Carson kept exchanging glances, clearly lost without their father's direction. Finally, Dad spoke. If we accept the licensing agreement, do we maintain control of operations? Yes, I said. You run the business however you want. You just pay me for the right to use my culinary innovations. Think of me as a very expensive consultant you can never fire. And if we sell to you? Then I own everything. The restaurants, the real estate, the franchise agreements. You walk away with $42 million to split however you want. I'm assuming you were planning to divide it between Tyler and Carson anyway, so they'd each get $21 million. Not bad for businesses they didn't actually build. Aunt Linda laughed again. She's got you cornered, Richard. Admit it. Dad looked at me, really looked at me, for perhaps the first time in years. When did you become this ruthless? I learned from you, I replied quietly. You built an empire by being tough and uncompromising. You taught me that business isn't about feelings, it's about value. I'm just applying your lessons. The difference, Aunt Linda added, is that Madison actually has the skills to back up her position. She's not just inheriting success. She created it. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. I need to mention something else. Madison contacted me 6 months ago about these patent issues. I advised Richard to review the intellectual property situation before proceeding with the estate distribution. He declined. Dad's eyes widened. You knew? I gave you the opportunity to address this properly, I said. You could have acknowledged my contributions. You could have offered me a partnership. You could have treated me like an equal instead of an afterthought. You chose not to. Tyler suddenly stood up. What about our franchise owners? If we accept either option, how does it affect them? It was the first intelligent question either brother had asked, and I felt a flicker of respect. The franchise agreements remain valid, Sarah explained. They'll continue paying their fees to whoever owns Clark Restaurant Group. The only thing that changes is who they're paying. The food, the operations, everything stays the same. Unless you choose option 3, I added. Then their agreements become worthless because they can't legally serve the food they've been advertising, and they'll sue you into oblivion. Carson slumped in his chair. We don't really have a choice, do we? Everyone has choices, I said. You just don't like your options. Dad stood up and walked to the window, staring out at Michigan Avenue. For several long minutes, nobody spoke. I could see his reflection in the glass, watching his expression cycle through anger, frustration, and finally, something that might have been grudging respect. The licensing agreement, he said finally, not turning around. 23%. But I want a clause that allows us to buy out the patents after 10 years at a pre-negotiated price. Smart. He was already planning his exit strategy. Agreeable, I said. The buyout price will be calculated at fair market value at the time of purchase, determined by an independent arbitration panel. You'll also add a clause acknowledging my role in building Clark Restaurant Group's success, to be included in all company materials and franchise agreements. He turned around. You want credit. I want what I earned, I corrected. Recognition for the work I did. That's not negotiable. We stared at each other across the conference room, two stubborn people who'd spent years locked in an unspoken battle. Finally, he nodded. Fine. Harrison, draw up the licensing agreement with Madison's terms. We'll sign by end of week. Actually, I said, Sarah has the contracts ready now. We can sign today. Dad's laugh was bitter. Of course you do. You've had this planned for months. Years, I corrected gently. I've had this planned for years. Every time you dismissed me in a meeting. Every time you gave credit for my work to Tyler or Carson. Every time you made it clear that daughters weren't real business people. I was documenting, planning, and building my exit strategy. Sarah distributed the contracts. They were comprehensive, covering every possible scenario and contingency. Dad's attorney reviewed them carefully, occasionally asking questions, but ultimately finding nothing objectionable. The terms were tough but fair. Before we sign, Tyler said suddenly, I want to understand something. You said you've been acquiring and operating restaurants for 5 years. Where did you get the capital? I'd been waiting for this question. Remember when Grandma Clark died 8 years ago? She left me $200,000. You all assumed I spent it on culinary school debts or something frivolous. I invested it. 3 struggling restaurants that I turned around and sold for significant profit. I rolled those profits into more acquisitions. Compound growth. But that doesn't account for 18 restaurants, Carson protested. No, I agreed. The rest came from investors who believe in my track record. Venture capitalists who understand that the restaurant industry is changing and that someone with both culinary excellence and business acumen is rare. I've delivered consistent 20% returns for 5 years. Money tends to follow success. Dad signed the contract first, his signature harsh and heavy. Tyler and Carson followed, both looking shell-shocked. When it was my turn, I signed carefully, the same way I plated a dish. With precision and purpose. One more thing, I said as Harrison collected the documents. The equipment from the original kitchen. I'd like it delivered to my new location. I'm opening a flagship restaurant in the West Loop. Clark's by Madison. Featuring the recipes that built the empire, prepared the way they were meant to be. You're opening a competing restaurant? Dad's voice rose. Not competing, I corrected. I'm opening the restaurant I've always dreamed of. Fine dining, seasonal menus, techniques I've been developing for years but couldn't implement in your franchise model. The licensing agreement doesn't prevent me from operating my own establishments. You might want to read the fine print. Sarah smiled. Miss Clark's new restaurants are exempt from the licensing fees, as they're operating under a different brand name and not using the standardized franchise recipes. Carson looked like he might be sick. So you're taking 23% of our revenue and opening competing restaurants? Not competing, I repeated. Elevating. Your franchise locations serve good, consistent food to families and business diners. My restaurants will serve exceptional food to people who appreciate culinary artistry. Different markets, different experiences. If anything, my success will enhance the Clark name overall. Aunt Linda was grinning from ear to ear. Your mother would be so proud, she told me. She always said you had more steel in your spine than your father realized. We left the lawyer's office an hour later with signed contracts, transfer documents, and a new reality. Dad didn't speak to me. Tyler and Carson followed him out like confused puppies, unsure of what had just happened to their guaranteed inheritance. Aunt Linda and I went to lunch at my River North location. The manager, James, nearly dropped his wine list when I introduced Linda as my business partner. She'd been a silent investor in Phoenix Culinary Holdings from the beginning, believing in me when my own father wouldn't. How does it feel? She asked over glasses of Sancerre. Like justice, I said honestly. Not revenge. Justice. What's the difference? Revenge would be destroying them. Justice is making them acknowledge the truth while building something better than they ever could. 6 months later, Clark's by Madison opened in a converted warehouse in the West Loop. 16 tables, a chef's counter where diners could watch the kitchen work, and a seasonal menu that changed monthly based on the best available ingredients. We earned a Michelin star within 8 months. The second star came 2 years later. The equipment from the original kitchen held pride of place. The ancient Viking range where I'd first learned to sear a perfect steak. The KitchenAid mixer that had made thousands of batches of the rolls Mom used to love. The prep tables where she'd stood beside me, teaching me to trust my instincts. Dad never came to the restaurant. Tyler and Carson did, once, sitting uncomfortably at a corner table and ordering the tasting menu. I sent out extra courses, cooked with the same precision I'd brought to their franchise empire, and watched from the kitchen as they realized what they'd never understood. That cooking wasn't just cooking. It was art, science, and soul combined. The licensing fees came in monthly, $9 million a year that funded Phoenix Culinary Holdings' expansion. We acquired 32 restaurants over the next 5 years. Some we kept, some we turned around and sold. Every one of them bore my touch, my standards, my refusal to accept mediocrity. Clark Restaurant Group continued operating, making solid profits even after my 23%. Dad eventually stepped down, leaving Tyler and Carson to run the business. They surprised me by being more competent than I'd expected, once they stopped coasting on inherited privilege and actually learned the industry. We don't have family dinners anymore. Aunt Linda hosts occasional gatherings where I see Dad and my brothers, conversations polite but distant. We're business associates now, not family, and perhaps that's more honest than what we'd been pretending to be. The moment I replay most often isn't the contract signing or the restaurant opening. It's standing in the lawyer's office, watching Dad's face as he realized that the daughter he'd dismissed had outplayed him completely. Not through luck or inheritance, but through skill, planning, and the ruthless business acumen he'd insisted she couldn't possess. You're just a cook, Madison, he'd said. I proved him wrong in every way that mattered. And the best part? I did it using exactly what he'd given me. Used kitchen equipment, dismissed potential, and underestimated ability. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply proving that what they tried to throw away was the most valuable thing they had.